All right, so this is a World Health Organization document that was handed to me for review. This is not to try to point fingers at anybody or to try to somehow say someone's not doing a good job. This is simply to use as an educational tool to improve accessibility, because we all know that accessibility is really a journey and not a destination. There are always things we can do to improve how we create accessible documents, and there's also multiple ways it can be done. All right, so the first thing we're going to do when we open up a document, the first thing I do, first of all, when I open it, is I just check and make sure that it has tags in general. And we always want to start with a document tag. And most every document has a document tag when it's exported to a PDF. What you'll find is sometimes you'll have multiple document tags because someone simply merged a bunch of documents together and didn't bother to remove any excess document tags. But this one's fine in that respect. Now you could simply walk the tags tree and start going down and going, okay, paragraph, H1, and start doing that. But I tend to start with the checker because I want to make sure if there's any low-hanging fruit, any things that need to be taken care of kind of right off the bat, I want to know that. And this, honestly, once you save a document to a PDF, this really should be the first thing you do, because this is going to give you all the basics. And you can see here that we already have some issues going on. So the first thing we have here is title failed. Then we have some alt text failed, and we can see here that there's a couple of figures in here that are missing alt text. And then we have a couple of heading issues. Now this just happens to be one heading issue, but I can tell you there actually are several in this document, and we'll see those as we go through them. All right, so the first thing to fix is the title, and that's relatively easy. We right click and hit fix. It's going to ask us for a title. So typically what I do is I go back to the home page and I try to figure out what the H1 is, because typically that's going to be your title. So this looks like it's going to be Coronavirus Disease COVID-19 Situation Report 102. So I'm going to grab all that and I'm just going to copy. Then I'm going to go back to my report and I'm going to right click and hit fix. I'm going to uncheck this and I'm going to paste that. Now the second line didn't come through, so we're just going to copy that here. Situation Report 102. And the title basically is what's going to be read when the document is first opened, because we don't want to read 2020-0501-COVID-19-sitrep.pdf. We want it to read what the document actually is, right? So the title, the author here I'm not sure who that is, but we're going to change this to World Health Organization. And you could organization, right? So you could change this to whatever you'd like, and then hit OK. And then you're going to see that this is going to fix itself here in about 2 seconds, right? And now you can see that the title has passed. Okay, so we have some other issues here. So before I start fixing all this alt text and these heading issues, I'm going to start walking through the document. Okay, this just gives me a broad brush idea of what are some of the major issues with the document. Now remember that just because you pass this checker, even if all of these are green, does not mean that your document is compliant right off the bat. It requires review, it requires thought, it requires going through the tags tree to make sure that your tags are logical and they comply with WCAG 2.0, 2.1. And we're going to find some issues here that are definitely going to be violations, and others that are going to be just best practices. So first thing we want to do is we're going to go back to this tags tree. And we're going to look here. Now, if I'm trying to figure out what the title of this document is, what is the main H1, it would not be Situation Report 102, because you wouldn't say to someone, hey, have you seen Situation Report 102? There's no context there. There's not enough information. So really, both of these things should be the H1. So you could make them both H1 tags, but I prefer cleanliness in my tags tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to combine the two, and I'm going to grab it and drag it down there. And then I'm going to delete that empty tag. And now the H1 will read Coronavirus Disease, parenthesis, COVID-19 Situation Report -102. Okay, so that's going to be that. And then paragraph that looks fine. We want to try, whenever you can, see we have these extra paragraph tags. Remove them. Removing them in the tags tree is just change it to artifact, and then we just hit OK. and then we can delete that. This just creates an extra page down or arrow down or tab key as somebody's navigating through this. So we want to try to avoid those if we can. Use space after and space before in our documents when creating documents that are accessible. Then we can see this is the H2, which is fine. And let's go ahead and zoom into this a little bit better. All right, so there's the H2. And then we're going to come down here. We got paragraph, paragraph. Now I can see there's some hyperlinks in here, right? And one of the problems with this is that they are bold, but really you should have a different treatment that lets someone know that these are hyperlinks very clearly. And typically the standard is underlining them. So if you were to change these to another color, there's a rule in WCAG that is success criteria 1.4.1, the use of color only, meaning that the use of color is not the only way to differentiate between something. So you have a secondary indicator. And here, bold, although it's technically different, it really doesn't stand out as well as an underline. So I would probably go through and underline all of these hyperlinks to make them stand out very clearly. Okay, so not a violation, but not a clear success either. All right, so as we go through here, we can see we're at P tag, and then we've got this extra P tag here. And anytime there's a path, we want to artifact those because they don't really do anything. So we're going to remove those. Now, I look at this document and I say, okay, this is my H1. Here's my H2. Now this is being called an H3, but it really is the same level as this highlights, right? It's not a subset of highlights. So really this should be an H2. And then if we look down here below here, we can see that this area here is, it's 3 different columns, although it's really, whatever this is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows of data. Africa, how many cases, and et cetera, right? This really isn't a table, so it doesn't qualify, but it definitely, in the tags tree here, we have H4, which really, this is definitely not an H4. It should just be a paragraph tag. And then here, we have H4, 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 H4. This is basically a bunch of headings. So if I'm non-sighted and I'm trying to understand what I'm hearing when these are read, I'm thinking these are titles, right? Because a heading is typically a title. So I'm thinking I would not have these as a title. I would have them as a list because we're talking about globally how many cases and how many deaths in each of these sections, right? So we can do this a couple of different ways, but the easiest way to do this is to select all of these, and we know that each one is going to be a list item eventually, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Properties, and we're going to change this to List Item, and then we're going to hit Close. Now, all of these are list items, but they're not a list yet because we need a proper list tag in front of it. So we're going to go above that item because we want the tag to appear before this one. So we go here and we go New Tag and we do List, right, to generate our list. And see, you can see here that it generated our list tag, but now these list items need to get put under this list tag. So we drag them up underneath there. Now we have a proper list, and each one of these list items is going to read these specific cases. And to be honest, each of these really should should have the comma in the number, because otherwise JAWS and NVDA is going to read this as 663 cases. Left parenthesis, right, 1950. Okay, so really you're missing your proper punctuation here for these number sets. So if you're not going to put them, that's fine, but don't put a space because a space is going to separate these numbers. So how do we fix that, right? Let's say we don't have access to the source. Well, we know we tried fixing the actual text and it breaks it. So the only other way, fixing the actual characters in here. So the only other way to do this is to go in here and set some actual text. So in this area, you can see each of these list items here has spaces in between the numbers. So when we do that, the screen reader is only going to read what it sees, which is 3, 172, 207 cases. Now, that's not the same as 3,175,207. So we want to make sure that we give them the correct voicing. So we could try to edit these actual list items using the edit PDF, but I've already tried it and it actually breaks each of these list items and doesn't work. So what we can do is we can set actual text, which is we want to tell it to say something different than what it would actually read on its own. So we can right click in here, and if we go to globally and we right click and hit properties, you can see I've already set in here globally, and then I've taken out the spaces so that it still reads exactly the way it is, right? So this will read 275,207 cases. And that's the way it should read. Now, it doesn't say that these parenthesis values are in the last 24 hours. Which really is kind of problematic throughout this whole entire thing, right? So up here, it should say total number and then new cases in the last 24 hours enclosed in parentheses. And that lets someone know when they hear the parentheses that what that value actually means. Because in some cases, screen readers are going to ignore parentheses based on that person's verbosity setting and based on the preferences they have set up. You can have it so that it reads every single piece of character punctuation or not. But good document hygiene says that you should be very descriptive about what different symbology means, because not only does it create a barrier for people who have low or no vision, it creates a cognitive barrier when you're asking people to make assumptions based on symbology. So you might even have a column on its own that is numbers in cases in the last 24 hours. Then, of course, doing this as a table. There's lots of different ways to do it. But given what you've got here, definitely you want these numbers to read correctly. So if we go through here and look, you can see that I've already set all of the actual text. Now, you don't want to set actual and alt text, just actual text. All right. So that takes care of this list. So now you can see here we have all of these list items. They have to be moved underneath this list. So these are all the list items. We're going to drag those underneath there and let go. And now you can see we have one actual list with the right values. Okay, then we move to the next page. There's a H2. Now we have an H2 here. Really, this isn't an H2. It's more of an introductory paragraph. So I probably would change this to a P. Remember, headings are anchor points. They are launch points where we want to be able to move from topic to topic. As a blind or low vision person using a screen reader, they use those anchors, which is the H key or Shift H to go back one heading, to bounce from section to section. So adding a lot of extra headings inside your document that aren't actual launch points really creates a confusing user experience for people using screen readers. So be systematic and programmatic about how you use those. All right. So we've got paragraph, 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 paragraph. Now again here, the only difference really between this regular text and these hyperlinks is color, which is definitely a violation of WCAG. So you would want to come in here and actually put an underline in here, which actually creates it solves one problem, but creates another, because underlines, in order to be PDF UA compliant, need to be artifacted. If you're just trying to pass WCAG, it doesn't matter, but just realize they really should be underlined. Okay. Now, so we're going to walk through our tags tree some more. Paragraph, paragraph, that looks fine. Now what happened here? We've got nothing. That's an empty tag, so we're going to change that to an artifact and delete it. Now we're on to page 3. Now here, that's an H2. Now here we go from an H2 to an H4, which is a violation of PDF UA and WCAG. your associations really need to be semantic. They need to be H2, H3, H4, and not split, not miss any headings, right? So we know this is an H2. This is really a caption. This can be, you could label this a paragraph and be just fine, but since we're doing this kind of correctly, so this is H2, this is our caption, and this is our figure. Now, our figure really should have alt text for this figure, right? So how do we come up with the right alt text? There's so much information on this page, and there really actually isn't even any numeric information, because here we have this chart that says 0 to 100, 100 on up, and it really just is giving us a general idea, kind of a heat map of where are the most cases in this geographically and the worldwide. So alt text really, you can come at this a couple of different ways. You can point out which ones have the most. You could point out which ones have the least. You could give the total range. It's really up to you. So in the document that I've already edited, I came up with this world map by color grade, showing cases reported in the last 7 days at levels of. And basically, what I did is I read the legend to give them an idea of what types of things this is covering. You could also add that with North America or the United States, Alaska, showing cases beyond 100,000, right? I mean, that could definitely be part of this alt text if you wanted it to be. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just copy this over to our other document here, and we're going to paste that in. That sounds good, and then we're going to hit close. Okay, and then we're going to go, there's a paragraph, and you can see we have a hyperlink in there, and then now we're back to H4 again, but we decided programmatically if that this is going to be a caption, and if we decided above that this was going to be a paragraph, then we'd want to make this one a paragraph too. You want to be systematic in how you label things. Okay, now here we have an empty paragraph tag. We're going to artifact that. All right, now we have this next figure, right? And so how do you describe this one? So if we go over here to properties, we don't have alt text for it. So if we go to the one that I've already done, and we go to, let's close this, and go to this next figure, you can see here that I have said, bar chart showing the following regions in order of number of cases from smallest to largest with the range from 0 to 90,000. So I'm setting, one, it's a bar chart, so they understand what type of graphic we're considering. Two, what is it really explaining? It's explaining different regions, right? And then three, what is the value? Well, the values are from 0 to 90,000. And so I decided that the best way to kind of give them a visual picture or a mental picture of this would be to start from smallest to largest, since there are no values. Now, from a cognitive standpoint, this chart has some issues because there really should be labels, or there should be an associated data table that goes with it. Now, if the table on the next few pages is the data that builds this bar chart, then you're totally fine. The way this is being laid out here, you could just say bar chart showing the following regions in order of number of cases, and then go through what I've said here, and then add on here as detailed in the table values within this report. Values within this report, right? So then we say, hey, look, it's on the pages coming up. So we're going to hit close, and we're going to go to the one that I created already. Here we go. And then we're going to hit paste, right? And then close. We're good to go. All right. Now we can move on. There's our new paragraph. Here's another H4. So we already know what this is going to be. This is a caption, right? Okay, now here we get to the tables. Now these tables are problematic. One, because they span all of these pages. Your table starts on page 5, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 pages worth of one table. But the problem we have here in the tags tree is that the table is actually not one table spanning 9 pages, but 9 tables. And that's not good, right? So WCAG and the Matterhorn principles say WCAG has no real rule about merging tables across pages, but PDF-UA does, in that you should only have one table because you really do have one table. It's just spanning across multiple pages. The problem is that in each one of these tables, they have to hear the heading all over again. So how do we fix that? So what we do here is we want to combine these tables so that they're just one table, right? Now, programmatically, really, these should be a bunch of separate tables. These should be tables by region. That's going to make much more sense, because then you can say Africa and then have all these headings and then all of the areas in Africa. And then you have another table that is territories or Americas or Eastern Mediterranean. And so each of these is going to be much more understandable and semantic when they're their own tables rather than one giant table. And it requires a lot less remediation. Because once you start merging cells across these tables, these rows, you have to start setting some custom associations. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that here in a second. So let's go ahead and just do this first one. So we're going to merge this table on page 5 with this table on page 6 and page 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, this is our first table on page 5, and we have all our rows, and you can see each row is right here. And then when we go to this next table, we're now on page 6. That's our repeat heading that we need to artifact. So we're going to go like this and click on each one of these. Remember, if you click on too many and you miss one, it deselects them all, so don't select too many at a time. Change to artifact, hit OK. It's thinking. And now we have a bunch of empty, missed one. So now that we have this table heading all empty, we can just delete it. And then we're going to go to our table row. Now we're on page 6, and here are all our table rows. We want to select all these and drag them up into the table for table 5. So now table 5 starts there on that page, but it's both 5 and 6. You can see the page number up here change as I move back and forth, but they're all highlighted, which tells you they're all part of the same table. If I go one more page, nothing's highlighted. So you know that that's not in that same table. So we've done this for this one process, and now we can delete this table because it's empty. We need to do this for the rest of these tables. Now, the problem, I'm not going to bore you through by going through each of these, but the idea is that at the end of all of this, you really should have one table. Wait for the computer to catch up here. And table heading is just one single heading. And then your table body is all the rows across all your pages. And you can see they're all highlighted here. Now, the problem with how you have your table set up is that you have custom merge cells that separate the different regions. So that requires some special remediation. Now, normally, you can just set what your heading cells are by saying that, yes, everything in my first row is a heading and everything in my first column is a heading. But once you start merging cells, you create extra work for yourself, because now you have to say what the scope is for each heading. So a scope is what tells you whether or not it is a column header or a row header. So column headers are these ones that are up here at the top, also the ones in blue. And then a row header are these ones that are in the first column, because they detail out what the values are to the right of it. So how we do that is we go in to our table editor, right? I'm going to wait for this to draw. It's taking some time because it's a multi-page table. And we're going to draw a box right in between all of these. And then we're going to right click and go to cell properties. Now I've already set all these, but when you first do them, you'll see that the heading cell is selected, but the scope is set to none. And that can't be allowed. If you want to be PDF UA compliant, you have to have scope no matter what. But just for simple WCAG compliance, you have the minute you merge one cell inside your table, you're now forced to set what the scope is. So because you have all these merged cells, we now have to say this scope is column, right? And we hit OK. Now, this scope here, this Africa, is the heading row or the heading column for all of this section in here. So we're going to go right click, cell properties. Now I've already set this, but it was set to none, and I'm going to set the scope to column because it is the heading for everything below it. Now all of these guys right here on the left, they're all row headers because they are a heading that dictates what the information is in the row. So again, this was set to none, but now has to be set to row. And then you have to basically do that everywhere inside all of these rows, inside all of these tables. Except for this one, this is a table, this is a row header because there's no heading here, right? And in actuality, this causes problems because territories is going to end up being a header for these cells, even though it's really not meant to be. And there's some ways to fix that, but they're not easy and they require some special remediation. But for the most part, you know, the more simple you can make your tables, the better off you're going to save yourself when it comes to having to set proper scope. All right, so that takes care of the table, which I know is a lot of information. So if we look down here at this next one, here we have a list, right? And then we have a table. Now, this is not a table. It's not supposed to be a table. It's supposed to be a list. So we really definitely want to fix that, right? So how we can fix that, and I'm not going to go through all of the ways to fix it, but basically what needs to happen is it needs to become a list of its own. So here is a list, right? This is our list item, 1 item and 2 items. But then we also have a list inside of this list. It's a secondary, second level list. And that has to be set correctly so that it basically walks through that same list, right? And then this is the continuation. This part is the continuation of this list up here. So really, this is one big list with a nested list inside it. So you would have an improper use of table inside your list if you would have left it the way it is in here. Okay, and it creates a confusing user experience for people using screen reader because when they're thinking table, they're thinking data. Where's my heading cells? Where's my data numbers? What is it trying to tell me? They're not using this as a list. Okay, then we go through here and it looks like we have some H3s. I think these were these were H3s. Now remember in our document, because if we look back up here in this section, we realize that these are H2s, right? H1, H2, H2. And so if we follow that same hierarchy, then when we get down to here, these really should be H2s as well. So we want to change this one and this one and this one, right? Well, let's select them all and do them all at once. Properties, H2. And then hit close. And then here we have an H3. And then if we just keep walking our tags tree, you can see we have a bunch of blanks in here. You definitely want to get rid of those. That's bad. That's bad document hygiene. You don't want to have these empty cells in here. So the way you would do that is just click on them all. This is because somebody just hit enter, enter, enter to try to push the content to the next page rather than using Word page break. So we're going to change to artifact. Yes. Delete. Right click. Artifact. Delete. Okay, this was an H2. All right, now we're back on track. So now we've going back through here and we've got paragraphs. These are fine. Now this could be an H4, an H3 if you wanted it to, because we have an H2 here. This really could be considered an H3. So let's go ahead and do H3. Because you could foresee that that's a launch point someone would want to get to. Where's that additional table notes? There it is, right? It's a heading. And then there's your list, and that list seems to be correct and in order. And then you've got your footnote there. It's not terrible that it's just a paragraph tag, but it's fine. So then we have down here, we have another. Now we call this an H3 up here. So we're going to call this one an H3 down here, H3. And we always want to be semantic in how you take care of or assign your headings. All right, so that's the basics of what was wrong with this document. There was a lot of other little stuff that I went in and fixed, and it's still not perfect, but it is much better than it was originally. So now if we take the one that I did and we go through and we run our accessibility checker and we do full check, we can see here, it's always going to give you two issues. It's always going to ask you, is the reading order logical? And we know it is because we walked the tag tree. And is there any color contrast issues? Now, the blue that you're using here is compliant. There's no issue with that at all. The only color compliance issues we have really are the issues in between the difference between the it's not even really a color compliance issue, but it's the hyperlinks need to be underlined. Right? Now, to be PDF UA compliant, there's quite a bit of other things that need to be handled inside this document to artifact all of the non-text items that are not that don't have alt text in them. And you can see here that if we run this PAC3 checker, everything else checks out here except for the alternate descriptions. And if we look at our results in detail, we can see that here it's going to tell you alternate descriptions, and you can see in these notes, it's everything that has a hyperlink, because PDF UA requires anything that has a hyperlink to have alt text as well, so they understand where they're going if they were to click on it. But this is not required for WCAG. This is a PDF UA kind of stringent requirement, and so that's up to you to fix. But otherwise, everything else in here is good to go. All right, I hope that gave you some information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, dax@daxcastro.com. And thank you again for reaching out to me and having me review this document.